All right. So, our objectives today are to identify the role of metacognition in reflection and learning, as well as explore best practices for student reflection. And so, we're going to do that by walking y'all through a few of these elements metacognition and how, and then score summary. We're going to show you some examples of practice and then talk about students tracking their progress. So, our words of wisdom are going to be coming from Dr. Jeremy Wagner. Please take it away, Dr. J.
Thank you, Dr. Allison. Today, we're going to continue the journey that we started in part one of our assessment series a couple of weeks ago. Last time, we talked a lot about the assessment system as a whole, or the entire assessment program, if you will, and ways to either build it from scratch or review it and revise it with solid feedback from a group of really critical stakeholders, looking at curriculum components that your district has access to, and really shoring up and making sure your assessment program is doing what it needed to do. The foundation of any assessment program we talked about last week, it has to be built upon really solid execution of various things like standard coverage, appropriate rigor on your assessments, alignment of your assessments with the standards. And we also looked at a lot at the feedback cycle for assessment, and we talked about it kind of as a whole. Today, we're going to be revisiting that, but diving into two really important steps in that feedback cycle to answer this question on your screen. I just gave a test. Now what? Sometimes things really stall out and an assessment is given without any kids or follow-up or follow-through on what is learned from that assessment. Sometimes we give it, we assign grades, put them in the grade book, and then we move on. So what can we do to help students engage with their learning after an assessment is actually given? Well, for premium customers, Aware offers what we call post-assessment activities. Now, I'm not going to spend all of our time today talking about the Aware premium features, but we are going to use the concept of a post-assessment activity as part of the feedback cycle. Post-assessment activities help educators target student learning gaps and create healthy feedback cycles to promote student ownership of learning. The key concept here is student ownership of the learning, which can be very difficult to cultivate. So last time, I spent some time reviewing that feedback cycle, like I said, as a whole and how it applies to the entire assessment program. Today, we're going to focus in a little bit more on the teacher analysis portion and the student reflection stage. We'll also talk a bit about the reteach and practice activities, but we'll hit those a little more heavily in a future part of the assessment series. So be sure to come back next month for part 3. So again, you just took a test. Now what? First, we start with the fact that the student takes the test, hopefully in Aware. Then the teacher analyzes that test using quick views. We'll talk about this a little bit more in depth here in a moment, but there are some key questions to really consider while doing that analysis. What are we noticing? How did the students perform? What concerns are there? What views within quick views should you look at, and when should you look at them? Single test analysis is a feature in Aware Premium that we're going to look a little more in depth into in part 3 of our assessment series, but if you have access to it, it's a really great way to do that teacher analysis segment as well. Often, the feedback cycle pauses, like I mentioned before, or even stops after the analysis, right at the top of the cycle. So what do we need to do next? This is another big portion of what we're going to be diving into today, but the short of it is we have to get the students to reflect and respond to their learning and respond to the assessment itself. Then continuing after that opportunity to reflect, often teachers try to group their students using data and the student reflections as guidance, emphasis on the and, because the student reflection piece has to have value. Otherwise, why do it? Students then receive practice activities for that intervention or enrichment, which is used to decide, are the students progressing? And then finally, they're given an opportunity to retest and hopefully demonstrate that they've mastered those skills or have grown towards mastery in those skills. As we stated before, the most important aspect of the feedback cycle is cultivating student ownership. Providing students an opportunity to reflect after an assessment is a method to increase student ownership of their data and their learning. Over time, this can help provide students with a sense of growth and capability. They can see how their performance changes over time, which helps cultivate that sense of I'm capable. And students who feel capable are often empowered to take the lead on their educational journey, which is really the step that we need those kids to take. So how can teachers foster this relationship between their students and their learning? So let's take this step back just a little bit. Before the kids really take ownership of the learning, we have to understand what we want the kids to take away from their learning. So to start there, after students have taken the test, but before we let them reflect, we have to dive into the data that comes from the assessment. There are a number of ways to execute this via personal data analysis practices, PLC practices, campus initiatives, you name it. There's a ton of different ways you can look at and tackle the data and utilize quick views. There is no one correct way to look at the data and make decisions. The important thing is you just need to get in and do it. In quick views, we can recommend a few things to do that you can make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck from the data you're pulling. And then you can use that to decide, are my data practices really getting to the crux of what it is I'm needing to pull from this analysis? So the first part of this is to really just dive into quick views. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a browser, and we're going to show you an example of all of the things that quick views really can do. And I want to give you a couple of bumps, either in redirecting you in the right direction or even giving you the right direction on how to really leverage quick views in meaningful ways. So the first thing is to identify and find your test. You can use all these filters at the top to narrow in on particular years, but a general rule with quick views, it's going to list your tests with most recent up at the top. So if it's one you gave recently, while this list can feel overwhelming, oh my gosh, there's so many tests, if you gave it recently, it's going to be up near the top. If the list feels a little overwhelming, start with a filter that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. I'm looking for teacher tests, so I'm going to filter that, and I'm going to get it down, and I'm going to find the test I want. You don't have to go line by line, kind of like Classic used to make you do. And then I also want to point out this thing at the top. Teachers, for the most part, are going to start with all my students, but they can add class period filters to narrow that in as well. So ask yourself, am I really worried about all of my students across the entire test? Or am I worried about particular class periods or even student access lists of students in order to begin looking at the data with a more narrow student set? For now, we're going to stick with all my students. And then you have the option to load one of the 4 default data views that Eduphoria provides. We either have student scores, student reporting category breakdown, the student learning standard breakdown, or the student individual responses. If you've never used one of these other types of views before, now's a great time to start experimenting with that, because we're at a time of year where you've probably got your first set of unit assessments behind you and are working towards, and maybe even have the second set behind you as well. So you've got data to actually start digging into and playing with. There's also district-made quick view templates that can be used. These are created by administration users in your district, and you might even have some personal quick view templates that can be made on an individual level as well. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But to begin, let's look at just straight student scores. This is the easiest place to begin when doing your analysis of student data. When I'm in here, I get a list of my kids. I get a little bit of information that's automatically included with the base template, including whether or not they're special ed, their emergent bilingual status, their ethnicity, and a few other things. We also see the raw score, the scale score, if available, which for most local tests, scale score won't be a thing, the percent score, and then your performance level breakdown. I want to tie the performance level breakdown into assessment practices as well. If you're a Texas district, for the most part, you're probably going to have performance levels that are did not meet, approaches, meets, masters, and maybe even the high lows of 2 of those. But with my example today, this really truly was a formative assessment. I only needed to know, did the kids get it? Are they developing, or did they not get it and they're developing, or did they really get it and they're accomplished? And so that's how this particular assessment was set up. In formative assessments, it's typically a good idea to do it that way. Now, within quick views, with this, I can get a pretty easy check at a glance about which kids are at or above a particular threshold. But to make it even easier, I can click a heading and sort it from lowest to highest, highest to lowest, and it will adapt and show you that data in order. So I can take whatever line I need to in my performance and say, kids below this line are the ones I need to worry about for this particular assessment to begin looking at remediation. And then kids above this line, I might need to be looking at for enrichment, wherever those lines need to be for your district. There are also a number of ways that you can summarize the data, starting with the student view, student individual students at the top right, and then moving left, you can have a course or section summary, then a teacher summary. With teacher assessments, you're probably not going to need the campus or the district summary. So these two will end up populating numbers that are essentially the same as the teacher view. But if you have a district or campus level test, these buttons or summaries will be valuable or will provide you with valuable information as well. So I'm going to look at the teacher summary. Lost the rosters. I haven't rolled that over. Here we go. So I'm going to go to where they were, and I can see this teacher, Sam Cameron, had 22 kids that took the test, and approximately half the kids were at the developing, and then approximately 13% were at accomplished. This might be a good way for me to decide if I want to use generic performance level data to decide which group of kids I need to focus on, but I can also get some demographic breakdowns as well and decide, is there a particular group of students that might need a little more individualized attention? So this is the score summary, or the student score and score summary in a nutshell. One of the other views that's really helpful is the learning standard breakdown. Often when looking at your learning standards, this is where you're going to decide what needs to be covered. So with the student scores helps me decide who needs the help. The learning standard breakdown helps me decide what needs to be covered. Within that, I can sort by the standard as well. I can even hover over the standard and get a text. I'm not sure if you can see my hover over because sometimes Zoom doesn't play well, but if you can, awesome. But it'll actually tell you what the text is for that standard. 5.3G is to solve for quotients of decimals. I won't read the whole thing, but it's about math. Looking down at a glance, I can say, oh, this particular one, there are no kids that actually mastered this one. So this particular standard is probably one I'm going to want to look at. And then this one, I see fewer 100s. I'm probably going to look at 5.5A. But if I go to the teacher summary, I'm going to transition to where they were. I can see, yep, those two were definitely the lowest. Now let's talk about a principle real quick when it comes to remediation or identifying students for additional instruction. All standards can't be the most critical when it comes to helping get students to improve their performance. If all standards are important for remediation, then no standards are important for remediation. So we really need to run this through the lens of some things we talked about last time during the part one of our assessment series. Which standards are most essential? For a lot of us, it may be as simple as readiness versus supporting standards. But when I look at this, all of these are actually reporting standards. They have the little R inside of them. So from that perspective, they're all pretty critical. So I might need to run this through the lens of which one's going to be the most helpful for the next unit or a later unit, or which one is going to give me the biggest bang for my buck as a general concept. Maybe which one is more highly tested on the state assessment. But for now, let's just say I have 5.3G and 5.5A as my targeted standards because they're the ones that performed the lowest on this assessment. I can then ask myself another great question. Maybe there's something to the way the kids answered the questions that draws me into trying to figure out why those standards were so troublesome, which can help inform my remediation. By going to the individual response view, I can see right off the bat with this particular question, holy cow, look at number 2. It's a sea of red. I don't see one single orange or green. And orange, remember, is partial credit, where green is full credit for the question. I know that number 2 is a problem, and it's probably what's pulling down the average for this entire standard in a way that could mean that this standard wouldn't need as much remediation. Well, I'm curious, what is this question? I can click this preview button at the top of the column, and it will load the question for me in a new tab. I can use this to decide, is there a misconception that the kids might be having about this particular question? I can read through it, put myself in the chair of the kid, and try to answer that question. If it's a multiple choice type question, I can look at, let's say, number 8, just as an example, even though I'm not focusing on it. I can expand number 8, and I can see on the, let's go to a teacher summary. I can see on number 8 that 59% of kids picked D as the correct answer, but 27% picked the same incorrect answer, B. Well, maybe looking at that on question 8, let me find the right window, B is the number 1. I can reread the question, which is in Spanish in my example here, and decide, oh, B, they're picking this because they're doing this wrong thing. That is a very, very valuable piece of information to pull out of your analysis to decide how to address those misconceptions with those kiddos. Now, just to plug single test analysis, if you are a premium district, single test analysis will actually let you look at things like inline choice and number line, and you actually get an answer breakdown on how many kids picked which of the answers in the inline choice, and how many kids picked which of these answers in this inline choice, etc. So again, not focusing on premium for this as a whole, but single test analysis can really add a layer of benefit to this analysis while you're trying to figure out where the gaps are for your students. In a nutshell, this is the most important pieces when it comes to doing the analysis in quick views. You can get an idea of the student scores to identify the students you need. You can do a learning standard breakdown to identify the content you need to address. And then you can do an individual response view to identify the misconceptions that need to be addressed. Now, let's say I want to take this to a different level. Those templates that we provide are really powerful, but you have even more power at your fingertips with quick views with the edit button. Most teachers or most of our teacher users will have the edit button. Some districts have this turned off for their teachers, but every administrator in every district will have this edit button on a quick view. They can click edit, and right away you're going to see 3 tabs: a test tab, a column tab, and a summarize tab. The test tab is a great way for you to build your quick view in a way so that you can get tests layered side by side. So let's say, for example, I had this mastery test number 3, but I want number 2 and number 1 right next to each other because let's say they're like unit tests and I want to see how the kids performed over time. I can put those in, update the view, and then I can get all 3 tests right next to each other, and I can see that this first student, Virginia James, did really great on number 3, not so great on number 2, and still not so great on number 1. So if I put these in the correct order and went 1, 2, 3, I could see something happened with that kiddo to get them up there. More than likely, what really happened is I just hand input the answers in a better way for that particular kid at that time. But it can pull valuable insight out if this was actual real data. Another really powerful thing you can do in the edit, past the test column, past the test tab is the columns tab. In the columns tab, I can add more things to it, which allow me to filter. So say I want to add the emergent bilingual filter column and then add a filter down here at the bottom. And I only want kids that are currently emergent bilingual. I can check that, and it's actually going to filter that for me. And it's going to show me the group of kids that only apply to that particular status. Really powerful way for you to narrow down what it is that you're doing. And then the last tab is really helpful for your summary views, not as helpful for your individual student views. I can add various demographic fields that don't appear as rows in the summaries automatically, and I can drag them in if I'd like them to be there, such as gender if I needed to, or economically disadvantaged if that is available for you as a user. Pardon me. Now, let's say I've done all this work. I've got a view that I really, really love, and I'd like to use it or come back to it again. You can then save that view up here towards the top left with this button that says Save as a New View. Now, I want to caution you, when you click that button, you hit Save as a New View, you'll get a pop-up window that says you've saved it. You can hit OK, and then a Save button will appear. These 2 buttons can be confusing from time to time for users. Save as a New will actually generate a brand new saved view, whereas the Save button will save any edits you make to the view as you're in it right now. And you also notice it's pretty generically named, Student Scores. Well, if I come over to my data view bank, I see student scores here a couple of times because in my demonstrations over time, I've saved a student score base template before. So I'm going to want to rename that quick view before I keep making more data views in my data view bank. Well, this is the one I just made. I know because it was up near the top. I'm going to go up here to edit, and I'm going to rename it with the EBEL filter, and then I'm going to hit save, not save new, but save. And it will update the title of that particular view right here at the top. And then when I go to the data view bank over here, wrong button. Here it is, saved student scores EBEL filter. And you can see some of the others we've used just through demonstration. So as you can see, Quick Views has an absolute massive potential for you to dig into the data in really meaningful ways and bring this data to conversations with your administrators, or for administrators to bring it to teachers, or for teachers to bring it to PLCs. And you can start to identify kids at a very specific and very intentional way. Now, one last thing I want to bring up before we leave the Quick Views area, I filtered down and curated a list of kiddos. I have the ability as a teacher to send this list of kids straight to a student access list for approval with this button right here. And that student access list will become once it's approved, one of these down here that I can go straight to and filter any quick view to that specific group of students. Now, remember, student access lists do require approval. However, if I'm a district administrator, oh, no, not author, I want to go to quick views. If I'm a district administrator or campus administrator, I can open up a quick view, and that one has no data. Sorry, demo sites, folks. Let's do that one. I have a different option once I make an edit to it. Instead of adding the kids to the student access list, I instead get the option to add them to a monitored group. So let's quickly just add a demographic in here. Update. Oh, am I in this right user? I might be having a branch problem. I should have a button right here that says add to group. You've probably seen it. Of course, that's the way when you're demonstrating things go wrong, right? So leverage those functions and those abilities to make sure you're getting groups of kids in the correct places. And then the last thing I want to show you, once a monitor group is actually created, you can apply said monitor group to a data view in the columns and then monitor group section. Lots of example monitor groups here, but I can drag this monitor group we made into the view as a column, hit update, and it's going to show me those kids according to that monitor group. All right, now I covered a whole lot, and some of my slides are going to now be a little bit redundant, so I'll hit on them just real fast and we'll keep moving. You can do teacher editing, like I said, drag in fields, add filters. Oh, let's talk about reports. Reports are a really, really powerful way to get into some data analysis without some of the nitty-gritty of quick views. We have a variety of reports that can assist with very specific things that you want to know. One of the most popular ones is the incorrect response report. That one will let you generate a PDF of all of the incorrect responses on an individual assessment. This can be really helpful if you don't have something like single test analysis to identify at a very high level what the misconceptions might be from an assessment. You can dig into it and ask questions about why particular responses are being chosen and then make plans accordingly to correct those mistakes. This is also helpful in potentially grouping students that are making perhaps the same error on an assessment. The next report I want to talk about is the constructed response report. The student constructed response report has recently been made available to administrators. So if you're an administrator on this and you haven't gone and looked at that one yet, go take a look at it. You now have the ability to go pull and look at the student constructed responses. The student constructed response report had a facelift recently as well. This report allows you to actually preview the student responses in a table format. You can apply filters to it, narrow it down to specific groups of students if need be, and then export those results. If you subscribe to Lead Forward services on our platform, you also have a variety of reports like the subcluster intervention report. This particular report can be really powerful in helping group students as well for remediation purposes. They actually lump them together by the various subclusters and how well they either did or didn't get that concept. And then you have the TEAC scaffold report, which can help with specifically math content in grouping together performance of TEACs in very meaningful ways. So explore those if you have that Lead Forward subscription. This is one I talked about. Here's what the ad group should have looked like. I really think I was on the same branch on accident. So I had a teacher user and an admin user in the same place at the same time. So that's my fault. But that's what that button would look like if you curated your own list. Then you can pull in that monitor group like I mentioned before. We'll skip that one for now. Great. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the analysis stage. After the analysis, I've taken the time to actually identify who and what. Now we have to talk about the importance of getting the students involved. This is where that reflection really comes in. And to really dive into that, we have to talk about this concept of metacognition. First, what is it? At its base, metacognition is the ability to think about one's own thinking. It's the ability to sit down and actually think about the process of thinking. And this is really helpful because it can lead to being able to actually condition your brain into making different types of thinking patterns when you're thinking about your content in your assessment. This is very beneficial for learning because truly internalizing reflection and goal attainment, an individual student needs to be able to show their thinking and really target down to specific ways of thinking about that content and how they performed and answered a specific type of question. This can be a absolutely monumental effort for students, especially younger ones, as it takes a very high level of self-awareness in order to actually be able to do this. It also takes training and explicit examples to replicate because students are not intrinsically able to do this. It's a very unfamiliar concept to some of them. You have to be able to prepare them and demonstrate them in the process of reflection through metacognition with very explicit examples and actually say the words out loud to the kids that they should be saying to themselves in their heads. This may take several attempts before the kids actually begin to grasp it, and the kids are then able to replicate it. So through metacognition practices, we want students to be able to identify their own strengths and weaknesses, set goals, and then incorporate follow through in our classrooms into deciding if those kids have attained said goals. So let's set the stage for how metacognition could be presented to your students. You've got the test sitting in front of the students, whether that's in the online platform or on paper. They've gone through it, they've taken the test, and they've even come back to it and they've marked which ones they've gotten correct and not correct. The first thing we want them to be able to do is identify those strengths and weaknesses that they have. So what questions would you ask yourself as a teacher to get yourself to identify your own strengths and weaknesses in terms of that test? Write those questions down and then go through those with your students. Some examples might be, when I see questions 1, 3, and 4, they're all about adding fractions, but I missed 2 out of 3 of those. So this probably means that I'm having a hard time with adding fractions. That's an example of the thought processes through metacognition that the students need to be able to do. So you need to walk them through that. And then you need to stop right there. We have to help the kids understand before we continue much further than that, that it's okay to be where you are. It might not be okay to stay there, but it's okay to be where you are. You don't need to feel bad about it. Identifying a weakness isn't a bad thing. It's the first step in improving, growing, and owning your own progress, owning your own learning. Now that you've identified a weakness, we can begin the process of setting a goal to improve that identification. Think about ways that you can step the students through the process of looking at their tests, looking at their data, and figuring out what they're good at and what they need some help with. Now, let's also talk a little bit about the 2 most common types of goals you have that you have in a classroom setting. The first is just a flat performance goal. Sometimes these are frowned upon because they lack depth. An example would be, I want to improve by 15% on the next test. Honestly, it really is a very surface level goal, but it is still potentially a good goal because it has some important criteria that any goal should have. It's measurable, it's attainable, assuming you set it at an appropriate level. And then the other type of goal are SMART goals. You'll probably be familiar with SMART goals just as a concept, but just as a real fast review, SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. These can be about a performance on a test, content on a test, a standard, or it can even be about behavior, or it can be about a lesson. SMART goals may be more appropriate for behavior or pattern type changes. So like how I actually engage in learning or how I engage in self-correction. An example of one for improving problem solving might look like, to be a better critical thinker and decision maker, I will solve one complex problem on my own each week. I can get better by working on my skills with puzzles and real life scenarios. Problem solving is important for doing well in school and real life. And plus, it's going to help reduce my stress and anxiety. And I will keep a journal where I'll write down my challenges, possible solutions, and what I did to solve them. I will achieve this goal by writing in my journal throughout the semester. Holy crap, Dr. Wagner, that was a crazy, crazy goal. I'm not going to get my kids to write that kind of goal down. Yeah, you're probably right. You can simplify the snot out of that process. But remember, any goal that's written, it needs to have major pieces and components of a SMART goal in order to be something that you know for sure can be attained, and you know for sure something that can be checked off once it's been attained. Goal setting is a massive part of owning your own learning and growth. We use the concept of metacognition to get there, thinking about your own thinking, to identify patterns in performance and behaviors, and then we make those goals that should and can be used to reinforce and extend a student's ability to improve over time. Okay, so let's recap. We've taken the test. That's at the top left with the star. We've gone in and we analyzed the data across the top. We've identified kids, we've identified standards. We've talked about metacognition, and we talked about goal setting as part of the reflection step. When we reflect about a goal, there's no benchmark set to decide if the goal is achieved without the goal actually being set and recorded in some way. Without goals, reflection falls flat. And in simply identifying what went well and what didn't go well and not having a goal, it doesn't set the stage for a plan of action. So remember, incorporate those goals to have a plan of action for those students. So what's one way we can actually get kids involved in the reflection process while doing it in the Aware platform? Well, part of a reflection process can be enhanced with a student score summary. This is a test level setting that, when active, allows students to get back into the test after they've taken it to review the questions, review their answers, and see their score. So let me show you what that looks like from a teacher perspective. I'll go into author, and let's say I'm looking at mastery test number 3 again. There's a tab called the online tab, most of you are probably familiar with. And the student score summary is a toggle setting that can be turned on and off for the entire test. It's called enable students to view submitted responses. If I have that on, notice it has its own window. If I'm an administrator, let me go into author and show you one. The administration tab has its own window. This is the window where a test can be given or taken by a student. The student reviewing responses, or the score summary window, is a separate window that can be opened to maybe begin on the last day of the assessment or the day after the assessment is to be completed, and stays open for, say, a week or two until the kids have had the chance to get in and review the results. Teacher-wise, same general principle. The score summary window can be set to when you think the test will end and close when you're about ready for kids to maybe not dive into that assessment any longer. But what does that look like on the student side? Well, the students, when they log in, if they have no test available, but a score summary window is open on a test, they can actually go to My Test Scores, and then the test will become available for them in My Test Scores, where they can open a non-editable version of the test. They can't change their answers here, but they can go over the test with the teacher or with their peers. And so I can see at a glance which questions I got right and which ones I got wrong and which ones were partial. Poor Piers Coleman here did not do super great. This is just a demo kid, so don't worry, we're not sharing anything FERPA violation-wise, but this kid didn't do so great. But I can go through and actually review my answers and break down which ones I got correct or not correct. You may have a graphic organizer here where you've got like the numbers on a page and the kids start filling in how many they got right to make bar graphs, that kind of thing. This can help you do that. And then once they've done that part, they can go through question by question and look at the question and see what the standard was. They can see the question again. They can see what answer they picked. The teacher can tell them what the correct answer actually was. They can do any recording they need to in a learning journal or a graphic organizer you have, and then they can begin to start that reflection process. Notice this cool button up here at the top, note. If I were to add a note right here, I can record something and it will save it, and the teacher can actually go back and see that note. This is a really powerful way for kids to go through that reflection process in the test and then send feedback straight to the teacher so they can review it. What does that look like for the teacher? Well, if I go into administer and mastery teacher test number 3, I know that particular student I just saved that note on is in the 3rd period. Here's Piers Coleman. Look, there's 2 notes. And that's the one I just made on question number 4. And I have another one in here. It was question 2. I wrote another one, a sentence stem. This question was difficult because ... And here as the teacher, I can see there's 2 notes. I can click them, and then I can see what those notes were for that teacher. I'll need to refresh to see the newest one. But I can see those 2 notes, and I can review those and get that feedback straight from the student. And the student has a place where they recorded that reflection straight into our system. So student score summary, really potentially powerful. All right, that's what the students looked like. That's examples I already showed you live. Let's hit real briefly on an Aware Premium feature that is also really, really helpful when we're trying to identify the levels of mastery for student, which comes into play with this entire feedback cycle. Having Aware Premium offers a really good spot for teachers to go in and compile data all side by side and aggregate by standard, and then see the latest raw score right next to the total raw score for that standard and decide on 3 different levels of mastery. Once they decide on those levels of mastery, you'll note there's even a place to put some anecdotal information to say that this thing happened in class and I'm changing the mastery because of that, even though the data may not actually match that. And then you get some really great views and data views in addition to what's available in quick views to actually look at mastery from a completely different lens. So cool, Aware Premium feature if y'all have that, and make sure you're trying to utilize it through this process. All right, we're going really fast. Let's talk about example activities for reflections. There are different types of reflection activities you can do with your students. Possibilities are literally endless, but there are definitely some tried and true methods that you've probably tapped into in the past. There's nothing wrong with any of those. Keep in mind, though, that each reflection activity will only be as effective as you allow them to be in your classroom. If you don't approach it with the right mindset and attitude, the students are not going to approach it the right way either. Plus, if you never use the reflection activities that you have the kids do in your review and working with the kids in this reflection and feedback process, the kids are never going to see value in doing these things either. So if you make them do it, make sure you're using it in some way. The purpose of any reflection activity is to initiate and go through that metacognitive process for the assessment that you're actually looking at. We need the kids to reflect on their thoughts after reviewing a test. And with that, there are a number of key questions that can be asked. And these can be, but are definitely not limited to, which questions tripped you up the most? Which question was easiest? Why? How could you correct your thinking? Explain how you could get the correct answer. Then you could go more broad and do this with even after a lesson at the end of the class period and ask things like, what did I learn today? What was the most challenging topic? What did I learn that surprised me? The other part is capturing those reflections. Again, there are a number of ways to do that. A strategy that gets employed well, that I've seen work, is reflection journals. They keep a project journal or work or some kind of work log to reflect on their learning. They can answer reflection prompts like, what new content did I learn today? How did my effort contribute to my success? You have exit tickets on Post-it notes or digitally. Students, they reflect on their learning at the end of the period and they submit those either on the door or into whatever processes the teacher has. Think of and build ways to get students to engage with reflection with some of these question stems and have various strategies ready to go to actually go through them and look at them and use them. Don't forget, though, you have to be prepared to show them how reflection works in your room. Reflection has some key principles that you should follow as well. This process needs to be developmentally appropriate for the kids that you have in your classroom. Students like in middle school and high school are probably better equipped to answer more complex reflection questions. Younger kids may need sentence stems to get them started. Examples could be like, I feel good about, finish the sentence. I used to think blank, but now I think blank. A strategy that really helped me learn better today is blank. If I could do something again differently, I would blank. Sentence stems are a massively helpful way to get kids really started in the reflection process. Reflections can also look like graphic organizers or self-assessment quizzes. Prepare to review exemplars with your students. Each question in a reflection activity spurs on a student to think in a particular way about what they've done today in a class or on an assessment. Far too often, though, kids will skirt around even trying to answer these questions at first for one of a couple of different reasons. The first is they don't know how to respond. That might sound a little surprising, but most of the time kids don't engage because they don't know how. Remember, you can only get around this block by demonstrating for your students how to answer these questions. Far too often, kids will not know how to engage with this kind of thought pattern as they've had little practice in doing so. Worse still, sometimes they do have practice in doing this kind of thought, but they have mental blocks in how to do it with you or in your classroom. It's likely that sometimes your kids can answer one of these type of reflection activities in last period's math class, but suddenly they come into their science class and they get stumped and they don't even know where to begin. Kids often silo their experiences and thoughts into the various subjects and classrooms that they attend. So what happens in one class has absolutely no impact on what happens on another class. This is perfectly normal behavior for students. We have to get around that by providing the bridges for the various experiences that the kids do have by explicitly telling the students how they should look with these practices in your subject in your classroom. We also have to consider classroom culture. If your students are not used to doing this kind of thing, they're going to feel vulnerable in talking about things that they are good at and things that they're bad at. Think about ways to mitigate that by building trust. Keep things positive. Keep it about that growth. And lastly, as part of the reflection examples, don't spend too much time on it or overthink this entire process. Reflection isn't something that should take too much time out of your classroom. You've got things to teach. You've got things to keep doing. Think about how often reflection should take place for your students. Metacognition is something that, when practiced, is going to continue to build and will be ongoing and unfold in a very continual way. Practice in the classroom only needs to happen at key intervals, perhaps at the end of teaching a readiness standard, or maybe after a unit assessment, or after some really big moment that can be pivotal for a student's ability to take ownership of their learning. When it comes to over amplifying reflection, this means don't make the reflection more than it really is. Don't spend too much time on it. Reflection is a tool. It isn't an event. It's not something that needs to be graded. Reflection should never go in the grade book. It doesn't need a ton of fanfare either, but feel free to provide some fanfare when goals are achieved from those reflections. Make it a part of your processes in the classroom. Make it organic and make it expected. All right, we talked about student notes. I'm going to gloss over that one just a little bit, and that's the teacher experience and identifying and finding those notes. So when you get a copy of the slideshow, you have those examples if you'd like to look at them a little bit deeper. All right, we're going to take a quick kind of mental pause, and I'm going to ask Dr. Allison to send us a poll. I want to get an answer to this question. How do you gather reflections from your students in your district? Do you do it formatively, perhaps with exit tickets? Do you do it with software? If you do it with software, maybe tell us in the chat which software you are using. Do you do something like journals, which might include like graphic organizers? Or do you do something different? If you have something different, tell us what that might be in the chat as well. And you can select more than one option if you need to. Oh, good. We've got answers coming in. I'm going to let that go for just about 10 more seconds. 13 of you are in. Don't forget, drop in the chat if you answered other or software. What is that other thing that you might do, or what is that software you're actually using for those reflections? Awesome. Okay. I'm not sure if you're going to see these, so before I hit end, I'm going to let y'all know every single one of you said that you practice or your teachers practice formatively with like exit tickets or discussions. 23% of you said software, 36% of you said journals, and 7% of you said other. But our chat is very, very quiet. Crickets, crickets, crickets. Thank you for trying, Dr. Allison. There we go. Share results. Now you can actually see Google Forms. Thank you, Megan. Yes, Google Forms is actually a pretty good way to get some of that feedback, and you get the added benefit of having it recorded in a Google Sheet, which you can access later on. So that's not a bad way at all. Very cool. All right. Thank y'all for answering that. Oh, Google Classroom, Nearpod. Excellent. I haven't had as much experience with Nearpod, but I have heard definitely good things about it. All right, trucking on along. Here are some examples of some things that you can actually Google, some keywords or key phrases that when paired with the word reflection, you can actually get some really interesting results and get some really interesting ideas. And so if you're looking for like exit ticket ideas, go type exit tickets reflection, or even exit tickets and the concept you're doing. Go Google something like progress charts. There are a whole bunch of examples on how kids can fill in progress charts over time that can be really, really powerful. You can have kids reflect using a strategy called the 1-minute paper. You can have them record video journals. You can use acronyms, voice recordings, lead forward strategies. The opportunities are endless. So don't hesitate to go out there and do some searching and find ways to shake it up a little bit. Now, if you're Aware Premium, I have to hit this for just a second. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about how you can engage students with reflection straight in the online student platform without having to juggle a lot of exit tickets or use a third-party platform or software. You can build reflections using the post-assessment tab in Author. In it, you can create open-ended or multiple choice questions for your students to reflect on the assessment. Then you can use single test analysis to actually analyze those responses from the students. Here's kind of what it looks like from the student view. They actually get to see the test on the left side of their screen, and then they see the reflection questions that they need to go through on the right side of the screen. So if you have those sentence stems or you have an open-ended question you want the kids to see as a reflection question, you can build that straight in the platform in Author, go to post assessment, and then say I wanted to do it for mastery test number 3, which I've been showing you guys. We'll give that just another second to load. There we go. Right here, I can expand it. You can see there's actually some in here. We've been doing this a while. But you can create a retest, or you can create a reflection. You can only create one reflection per assessment, but you can create any number of retests. And then once that reflection is created, the kids will actually get that reflection in their online testing platform, and they can go fill that out. And you've got a nice place where you've got all the reflections actually housed in our system. All right. We've gone through the feedback cycle and we've hit really heavy today. Teacher analyzing that test data and students reflecting on the test and on their performance and setting goals. Let's keep trucking. The last topic I'd like to review with you all today is getting students to actually track their progress. Research into the most effective formative assessment practices shows that the students need to engage in reflection, but they also need to see the results that their reflection is creating. They need to see how meeting these goals that they've set for themselves and what all this work that they're doing is actually amounting to. To that end, how are you getting students to track their progress? There are a lot of different things that you can do, but in that process of getting the data, make the reflection, doing the goal setting and doing the tracking, you can do things like sticker charts with the really young kids, have bar graphs that they're filling in, checklists that they can check. You can do things at the classroom level, the summary level. Be careful with FERPA here. You don't want to put individual names up on the wall, but you can do first period's average compared to third period's average, et cetera, on various things. And anything at the student level can be kept with the students in something like a learning and reflection journal. But always keep in consideration those things that we've talked about, including the amount of time spent, the fanfare attached to it, and about tracking progress or maintaining high performance. What are you trying to do with those kids? Maybe it's both, and emphasizing both tasks or each task as it needs to be emphasized. This needs to be paired with the reflection and goal setting process. Otherwise, the metacognition process can't come full circle. And then to bring this all back into celebration, like I said, we don't maybe want to put a whole lot of fanfare into the reflection process, but we do want to celebrate achievements. All students, even high school seniors, absolutely love to celebrate their achievements. I cannot tell you how absolutely insane kids will go for something like a sticker, even your 11th and 12th graders. I have coached and I've worked with, I don't know how many high school teachers that are like, I don't know why, but I didn't put a sticker on this assignment and I did on the last 3, and I had kids about ready to rebel over a sticker. Little bitty celebrations can go a very, very long way. Ask yourself, are you and your students celebrating academic achievements as well as those other achievements that happen all across the school? It's real easy to celebrate those football wins, the academic decathlon placements. Are you celebrating the little wins in your classrooms? And are you celebrating growth? Sometimes it's more important to grow than it is to cross a particular performance threshold. So keep that in mind through all of these processes. All right, I have spoken a whole lot. I'm going to hand things back over to Dr. Ross. Take it away.
All right. So we have had a really quiet chat and Q&A. But if you have any final questions bubble up right now, you can feel free to drop them in the Q&A, or you can always email us after the fact. Sometimes when we have time to go home and steep on these things, we think of things that come up. So if you do find that, you can always email us at training@eduphoria.net, or if it's a support related question, it's support@eduphoria.net.